Snow fell thick over Willow Creek that night, but Emily Carter and her loyal German Shepherd Rex froze in terror when they reached the riverbank and saw it. A police officer tied inside a burning canoe, drifting helplessly in the middle of the dark current, his muffled cries fighting against the roar of fire. This was the moment that would test courage, loyalty, and sacrifice in ways no one could forget. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Share in the comments and join us on this journey. And if you believe in silent heroes and stories of hope, make sure to subscribe so you never miss one. Wishing you a blessed and peaceful day. The winter night had settled heavily over Willow Creek, a small town wrapped in snow and silence. The streets glimmered under pale lamplight, and children's laughter still carried faintly through the crisp air. In front of one modest home, a group of neighborhood kids played noisily, rolling snow into uneven shapes, tossing handfuls into the air, and shouting each other's names as though the darkness itself might echo them back. Among them was Emily Carter, a fragile 5-year-old girl whose life had already been marked by hardship. She moved carefully on her small crutches, the metallic glint of her prosthetic leg visible each time her dress swayed with the wind. Though her body was frail, her wide blue eyes shone with a brightness that refused to be dimmed. Beside her waited Rex, the German Shepherd who rarely left her side, a strong 6-year-old with a sable coat of black and tan and eyes that burned with loyalty. The game carried on with shouts and squeals, children pelting each other with snow until their cheeks were flushed red. Emily tried her best to keep pace, her laughter bubbling up whenever she landed a lucky throw, but her steps were slower, and soon the others grew restless, chasing each other into the deeper drifts at the edge of the yard. Emily stayed closer to the house, leaning against her crutch while Rex circled her protectively. He was larger than most dogs she had seen, muscles rippling beneath his thick winter coat, but gentle with her, lowering his head whenever she reached out a hand. He paused now, ears suddenly sharp, nose twitching at something in the distance. His body tensed as though a signal had struck him from the darkness. Emily noticed the sudden change and frowned, tilting her head. "What is it, Rex?" she whispered, her voice a thin cloud in the air. The other children paid no attention, their games spilling toward the alley behind the house, but Rex remained rigid. Then, without warning, he stepped forward, gave a short, urgent bark, and tugged gently at the sleeve of Emily's coat. The sound was unlike his usual playful bark. It was sharp, commanding, the kind that carried urgency. Emily stumbled a little but followed, alarm rising in her chest. She called to the other kids, but they were too absorbed in their own play to notice, so she allowed herself to be led, trusting Rex as she always did. The dog guided her away from the laughter, through the crunching snow, toward the riverbank that lay not far from the row of houses. The air grew colder as they approached, and soon Emily detected it too, a faint, acrid scent riding the wind. It was not the comforting smell of wood smoke that often drifted from chimneys in winter, but harsher, metallic, like burning oil. Her steps slowed as fear crept in, but Rex pressed forward, tugging again at her coat until she found herself at the edge of the river, staring into the black current broken by patches of drifting ice. Then, her breath caught. Out on the water, just beyond the reach of the bank, a small canoe rocked helplessly in the current. Its hull was already burning, flames gnawing greedily at the wood, smoke spiraling upward in a terrible plume that glowed orange against the snow-laden sky. Emily's heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Through the shimmer of fire and haze, she could see movement inside. She blinked hard, willing the smoke to part, and then the image struck her like a blow. A man, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark police uniform. His arms were tied cruelly behind his back, ropes cutting into his coat, his legs bound to the seat. Gray tape sealed his mouth, muffling his cries as he thrashed weakly against the restraints. His eyes, wild with desperation, locked on the shore for an instant, as though pleading with anyone who might be watching. Emily gasped, her small body trembling from both cold and shock. She had never seen such horror, not even in the stories whispered by adults when they thought she wasn't listening. The officer's figure twisted against the ropes, his chest heaving as the fire licked closer, the wood crackling beneath him. He was alive, but barely, and utterly helpless. Emily's first instinct was to scream for help, but her throat closed tight and only a broken sob escaped. Rex barked fiercely, his deep voice slicing through the night air, as if announcing the emergency to the entire town. Panic gripped Emily's heart. She turned on her crutches, stumbling in the snow, tears spilling hot down her cold cheeks. "Daddy!" she cried, her voice breaking, though her father was not yet near enough to hear. She knew what she had to do. She needed Jack. The thought filled her with urgency, and without waiting another heartbeat, she and Rex ran, one limping, one bounding, back through the darkened yard. The snow seemed to rise up and clutch at her legs, but fear gave her strength. Every thump of her crutch against the ground was a drumbeat of desperation. She burst through the door of their home, nearly collapsing as she shouted for him. Jack Carter, tall and broad with the presence of a man who had seen battle, appeared from the back room in an instant. His short dark hair was already streaked with silver, his face marked by the lines of years and wars endured, but his eyes were sharp the moment he saw his daughter's panic. Emily's words tumbled out between sobs, broken and hurried, but clear enough. A boat, a fire, a man tied up, the river. Jack did not waste time with questions. His instincts, honed by years as a soldier and sharpened further by fatherhood, snapped into place. He grabbed his heavy coat from the chair, pulled it on in one motion, and reached for the flashlight kept by the door. Rex barked again, spinning toward the river as though urging them both on. Jack gave Emily a firm nod, his jaw set. "Stay here," he ordered softly, though he knew she would keep to the doorway watching. Then he was gone, his boots pounding against the snow, Rex racing at his side. Emily stood trembling at the threshold, her hands gripping her crutches so tightly her knuckles whitened. She could hear her father's heavy steps fading into the night, mingling with the echo of Rex's fierce barks. Jack and Rex reached the riverbank swiftly, snow spraying up with each stride. The bitter air stung Jack's lungs, but his focus was iron. There it was, the canoe, burning bright against the dark waters, drifting dangerously as the current tugged at its scorched sides. Even from the shore, Jack could see the man inside, his form writhing in terror, the reflection of flames dancing across the tape that sealed his mouth. For a long breath, Jack's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing with a soldier's precision. This was not just an accident. This was a man left to die. The cold river stretched before him, black and merciless, the burning canoe just beyond reach. Jack felt the weight of the decision settle on his chest, but only for a moment. His mind was already made up. He shifted his coat tighter against his body, cast one last glance at Rex, who stood poised at the edge of the bank, muscles quivering with readiness, and then looked back at the flames, licking hungrily at the small vessel. The night around him seemed to fall away, leaving only the roar of fire, the choking smoke, and the bound officer's silent plea. Jack squared his shoulders, his face hardening. He would go in. He would not let this man die alone on a frozen river. The river lay before him, like a black mirror, fractured by ice and fire, the surface restless beneath the pull of the current. Jack Carter, chest rising with the steady rhythm of resolve, did not wait another moment. With one breath that burned as cold as steel in his lungs, he hurled himself into the water, Rex leaping at his side without hesitation. The shock of the current was immediate, slicing into his muscles, a numbing chill that would have paralyzed a weaker man. But Jack pressed forward, arms cutting in long strokes, every kick carrying him closer to the burning canoe that swayed like a beacon of disaster. The blaze roared louder as he advanced, flames swallowing the fragile vessel, and the acrid smoke lay heavy across the water. Sparks hissed where they met the freezing current, steam rising in ghostly plumes that blurred the line between fire and ice. Jack's skin prickled as waves of heat collided with the river's chill, his eyes stinging from the smoke, his throat raw with each breath. Rex swam parallel, his strong body slicing through the water with instinctive precision, his ears pinned back against the spray, his eyes fixed on the orange glow ahead. The dog made no sound now, every ounce of his being committed to reaching that vessel. As the distance closed, Jack's mind sharpened with the clarity of urgency. He could see the figure inside more distinctly now, a man bound cruelly, uniform scorched, head jerking desperately as he tried to draw air past the tape sealing his mouth. Each shift of the canoe sent him lurching closer to the fire that gnawed at the sides. Jack clenched his jaw, digging deeper into the water, each stroke burning in his shoulders. Beside him, Rex surged forward, a living compass guiding through the smoke. The bond between them was unspoken but undeniable. Neither would falter until the mission was complete. At last, Jack's hands found the edge of the canoe, the wood blistered and burning, threatening to give way under his grip. He forced himself upward, ignoring the sting in his palms, hauling his weight onto the side as Rex circled below, barking once in sharp urgency. The heat blasted his face, sweat already mixing with the river water dripping from his hair, but he did not waver. He pressed his forearm against the frame, peering through the smoke-streaked window where the officer thrashed. The man's eyes locked onto Jack's for a fleeting instant, blue-gray, bloodshot, wide with equal parts terror and a glimmer of hope. The glass stood between them like a cruel barrier, clouded with soot. Jack drew back his fist and drove it forward with all the force his frame could muster. The crack was sharp and absolute, shards scattering inward as flames leapt greedily through the opening. Jack shoved aside the jagged edges, ignoring the cuts to his knuckles, then reached in. The ropes were thick, fibers singed and fused, but Jack's soldier hands knew the feel of restraints, and he ripped at them with a furious strength. The officer twisted his wrists, struggling to aid the effort, muffled grunts forcing past the tape. The fibers groaned, then snapped, one strand after another until the man collapsed forward into Jack's arms. With no time to waste, Jack tore the tape from the officer's mouth, the sound ripping through the chaos. The man gasped, choking on smoke, coughing so hard his body convulsed. "Easy," Jack muttered, though his own lungs burned. He shifted his stance, muscles screaming under the weight, and dragged the officer through the shattered frame. Behind him, the flames surged higher, licking at the bench where moments before the man had been chained. Every second was a countdown to collapse. Jack gritted his teeth and heaved until they tumbled back toward the water's edge of the canoe. Jack braced himself, tightened his grip on the man's torso, and pushed him into the freezing current, following immediately after. The officer's weight dragged heavy, his body half-conscious and weak, but Jack's grip did not falter. Rex was there instantly, seizing the officer's sleeve gently in his jaws, steadying the limp form while keeping close to Jack's side. Together they turned toward the shore, the burning vessel groaning behind them, as though giving its last breath to the flames. Smoke rolled across the surface, blinding and thick, but Jack kept his eyes forward, every stroke deliberate, every breath a fight. The current resisted them, dragging like an invisible hand determined to pull them under. Jack's muscles throbbed with fatigue, the icy water gnawing at his strength, but he drove forward with the iron will of a man who had survived darker nights than this. Rex swam with unwavering loyalty, pressing against the officer's side, his powerful kicks breaking the drag of the current, his amber eyes glowing with determination. Each bark that slipped past his muzzle was a command to keep going, a cry that cut through the haze of exhaustion. The shoreline drew nearer, though it felt like an eternity. Jack's lungs begged for relief, his arms heavy as lead, yet he did not slacken his hold. He dragged the officer inch by inch, his boots kicking against the pull of the river, his vision tunneling onto the white edge of snow just ahead. Rex surged once more, snarling at the water itself as if daring it to take what they had fought for. Finally, Jack's boots scraped against the rocky shallows, and with a last desperate push, he hauled the officer forward, Rex pressing alongside, until all three collapsed onto the frozen bank. The world seemed to still in that moment, the roar of the burning canoe fading as it drifted downriver. Jack lay gasping, chest heaving, arms trembling, but his eyes flicked immediately to the officer sprawled at his side. The man coughed violently, each breath ragged, but air was filling his lungs again. His face was pale beneath the soot, his lips cracked and raw, yet life was there, stubborn and pulsing. Rex pressed close, shaking the river water from his coat, then lowered his head to nudge the man's chest with a soft whine, as if reassuring him he was no longer alone. Jack exhaled hard, relief crashing over him like a wave. Against fire, against water, they had pulled him back. Jack rested a hand briefly on Rex's wet fur, gratitude unspoken, but deep. The German shepherd stood tall, his chest rising with steady breaths, steam curling from his coat in the cold air. The officer groaned faintly, eyelids fluttering, and Jack knew he would live. Snowflakes drifted softly around them, the town silent beyond the trees, as though the whole world held its breath for this one fragile victory. Jack tightened his grip on the man's shoulder, anchoring him to the earth. They had come back from the edge, and for now, that was enough. The riverbank lay heavy in silence after the rescue, broken only by the rasping breaths of the man Jack had dragged from fire and water. Snow continued to drift from the sky, landing in fragile crystals upon the scorched uniform of Officer Ryan Hale. He was a man in his late 30s, broad-shouldered though shrunken now by exhaustion, his face pallid beneath the grime, his lips cracked, his dark hair matted to his forehead with sweat. Jack knelt beside him, one hand pressed against his back, steadying him as his body convulsed with coughs. Hale's voice was a thread, nearly swallowed by the night, but Jack leaned close, catching the broken confession. "They wanted me gone," Hale whispered, his eyes rolling back before focusing again with effort. His voice cracked, hoarse from smoke and river water. "Not an accident. Kidnapped, tied down to silence me." His chest heaved as though each word were drawn from the pit of his soul, and for a moment Jack could see the fear lodged deep inside him, not of fire, but of men who had turned cruelty into calculation. The admission settled in Jack's chest like a weight, for he had long suspected darkness in the shadows of Willow Creek, but to hear it spoken confirmed a truth too dangerous to ignore. Rex paced nearby, circling the boat's wreckage as though unwilling to let his guard down. His sable coat glistened with water, steam rising faintly into the night air. Suddenly, the dog stopped, head raised, nose twitching as if catching a scent invisible to human senses. He growled low, then barked sharp, ears pricked toward the line of warehouses that stood in ruin downriver, their rusted roofs hunched against the snow. The sound echoed with urgency, a warning that danger had not burned away with the canoe. Jack's eyes followed the direction of the dog's stare, unease prickling at the back of his neck. He shifted his gaze back to the rope lying beside them, the very cord that had bound Hale to his death. Its fibers were frayed where Jack had torn it, but on the strands glistened streaks of an unnatural orange, hardened into the grooves. He rubbed the residue between his fingers, the gritty smear catching light from the distant fire. Paint. Not river silt, not gasoline stains, but industrial paint, bright as hazard markings. Jack's brows knitted, his soldier's instincts sharpening. This detail was not random. Whoever had staged Hale's attempted murder had left their mark, careless or arrogant enough to carry the stain with them. Before he could turn this thought into words, the crunch of boots broke the silence. From the snow-dusted path came a man in uniform, his figure tall, lean, carried with the tautness of someone wired to suspicion. Deputy Mark Dalton stepped into the glow, his late 30s face angular, brown hair slicked back despite the storm, his sharp eyes glittering beneath the brim of his deputy's cap. His navy jacket looked almost new, too polished against the ruin of the night, and his expression carried rehearsed concern. "Jack?" he called, voice pitched with the practiced calm of an officer arriving late but wanting to appear in control. Jack rose slowly, body blocking Hale as much as shielding him. "Here," he answered, voice steady, though his heartbeat had tightened. Dalton approached, boots cracking through the crust of snow, his gloved hands held loosely at his sides. He glanced at the wreckage on the river, then at the half-conscious Hale lying in the snow. "Lord above," Dalton muttered, though his tone carried more curiosity than alarm. "I came when I heard the commotion. Didn't expect this." His eyes flickered to Jack with a quickness too fast for words, a searching glance that left a residue of doubt. Jack's gaze, sharp from years of reading men under fire, fell upon Dalton's gloves. At first glance, they were ordinary leather, worn and scuffed from patrol work. But along the seam of the right glove clung a streak of dried orange, faint but undeniable, the same hue that stained the ropes. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the realization burning in his mind. The stain was no accident, no innocent mark. It was evidence, and it linked Dalton to the very trap that nearly drowned Hale. Jack's instincts roared, but he kept his face still, his body language calm, as though nothing had changed. Rex did not share his restraint. The German shepherd's hackles bristled, a low growl vibrating in his chest like thunder before a storm. His amber eyes locked onto Dalton with unblinking certainty, his stance stiff, tail rigid, lips curling back to reveal sharp teeth. Dalton shifted uneasily, his feigned composure faltering for a heartbeat as he took a cautious step back. "Easy, boy," he murmured, but the words carried no warmth. Jack reached down, brushing a hand lightly against Rex's wet fur, the silent signal to hold back. The dog obeyed, but did not relax, his growl lingering, his body still a taut coil of warning. Dalton crouched briefly, as though to study Hale, but his eyes darted again toward Jack, measuring him, weighing what he might know. "He's lucky you were here," Dalton said, his voice smooth, carefully neutral. "Another 5 minutes and the river would have claimed him. Brave work, Jack. Brave, but dangerous. You should let the department handle this." The words hung in the air, carrying both suggestion and veiled command. Jack met his stare evenly, his own expression giving nothing away, the truth of what he had seen burning like a hidden ember behind his calm exterior. For a long moment the three men, and the dog who was more soldier than pet, stood in fragile balance, the night pressing down with its own cold weight. Jack knew the truth as surely as Rex did, but evidence was not yet enough to strike. He would wait, patient as the river beneath the ice, until Dalton revealed himself fully. For now he simply nodded, resting his hand on Hale's shoulder as if anchoring them both. "We'll see," he said quietly, his voice a promise more than an answer. Dalton straightened, his smile thin but his eyes still restless, and the storm held its breath as shadows deepened around them. The air of Willow Creek grew colder as midnight deepened, and the river's faint roar followed Jack Carter, Officer Ryan Hale, and Deputy Mark Dalton as they trudged through snow-packed paths. Hale leaned heavily on Jack's shoulder, his uniform soaked and torn, his breath still ragged after the ordeal on the canoe. Dalton led them ahead, his pace steady but too purposeful, boots crunching against the frozen ground with the rhythm of a man guiding not to safety, but to a trap. Rex padded silently beside Jack, ears pricked, eyes fixed on Dalton with suspicion that needed no words. The dog's instincts rarely failed, and tonight his unease was a shadow Jack could not ignore. The trail ended at the edge of the old river docks, where a row of abandoned warehouses loomed against the snow-flecked sky. Their rusted frames groaned in the wind, windows shattered, doors sagging with neglect. Yet from one warehouse came a faint glow, the unnatural kind cast by lanterns instead of moonlight. Dalton halted before it, turned briefly with a smile stretched thin, then pushed the heavy door open. Inside, the cavernous space smelled of oil and dust, its concrete floor streaked with tire marks. And waiting in the shadows was a figure whose presence filled the room before he spoke a word. Silas Crane emerged with the ease of a man accustomed to power, his tall frame draped in a dark overcoat that brushed against polished boots. His bald head gleamed beneath the lantern light, and the tattoo of an eagle spread its wings across his thick neck, the ink dark and permanent like the life he had built on fear. At 50, his body was broad, his posture confident, his silver beard trimmed sharp. His eyes, cold slate gray, measured Jack in an instant. Behind him stood 3 men, heavy-set, their jackets bulked with weapons and their expressions carved with loyalty to their leader. Crane's voice carried smoothly across the space, deep with arrogance. "So," he said, lips curling into a sneer, "a worn-out veteran and a stray dog think they can unravel years of work. You've mistaken courage for strength, Carter." Jack held Hale steady, his jaw tightening at the mockery, but he did not answer immediately. He had learned long ago that silence unsettled men drunk on power. Rex growled softly, the sound vibrating through the warehouse like a distant storm. Crane chuckled, amused, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. "And you, Officer Hale," he continued, turning his gaze toward the weakened man. "You should have kept your nose out of matters too large for you. Now you've dragged others into the fire. Loyalty is a dangerous luxury." Hale coughed, his body shivering, but even in his pain his eyes flashed with defiance. "Better loyal than bought," he rasped, voice strained yet cutting. Dalton shifted, the act no longer necessary. He pulled his pistol from the holster in one smooth motion, raising it toward Hale with a precision born not of duty, but betrayal. The metallic click of the hammer echoed like thunder through the vast warehouse. "Time to finish this," Dalton said flatly, his earlier mask of concern stripped away. His eyes were sharp, his smile cruel, as he angled the weapon toward Hale's chest. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the gun, the trembling officer, and the silence before violence. It was Rex who broke the stillness. With a sudden snarl that split the air, the German shepherd lunged forward, muscles coiled like springs, his body colliding with Dalton in a blur of fur and fury. The deputy shouted in shock, stumbling backward as Rex's weight struck him squarely. The pistol clattered against the concrete floor, skittering away into the shadows. Dalton struggled, arms flailing, but the dog's teeth flashed inches from his face, his growls a primal chorus that froze even the henchman at Crane's back. Dalton went down hard, his body striking the ground with a hollow thud. Jack seized the moment with a soldier's speed. He surged forward, his body moving on instincts drilled years before, and caught the nearest of Crane's men by the arm. With a twist and a powerful throw, he sent the thug sprawling against a stack of crates, the impact rattling the wooden beams. Another man lunged, but Jack's fist drove into his jaw, sending him reeling to the floor. Hale watched, slumped but awake, his eyes wide as Jack advanced on Crane himself. With a sharp motion, Jack caught Crane's arm, wrenched it behind his back, and forced the man of wealth and power down to his knees. For the first time, the tycoon's composure cracked, his sneer faltering as he struggled against Jack's iron grip. The warehouse erupted with noise, not from Crane's men, but from the outside. Sirens cut through the night, their rising wail growing closer, sharper, until red and blue lights bled through the cracks in the warehouse door. Shouts echoed in the air, the heavy rhythm of boots against snow. The doors burst open, and a wave of state police and federal agents poured in, rifles raised, orders booming with authority. The armed men behind Crane froze, caught between fight and surrender, before throwing down their weapons at the overwhelming force. Dalton, still pinned beneath Rex's weight, cursed bitterly as the agents closed in, snapping steel handcuffs onto his wrists. Crane's voice returned, though thinner now, laced with fury rather than confidence. "You'll regret this, Carter," he spat, his neck tattoo pulsing as he strained against Jack's hold. But the veteran pressed him harder to the ground, his voice low and steady, the voice of a man who had carried too many battles to be shaken by threats. "No," Jack said, his eyes like steel. "This town's done regretting you." The agents swarmed forward, pulling Crane to his feet, binding his arms, stripping away the illusion of untouchable wealth that had shielded him for years. Hale exhaled weakly. Relief, loosening his body as he slumped further against a support beam. Rex stepped back, chest heaving, his eyes never leaving Dalton until the handcuffs clicked shut. The dog's flanks rose and fell, steam curling from his fur, his loyalty and courage undeniable. Jack knelt briefly to rest a hand on his partner's soaked coat, a wordless acknowledgement of the life Rex had just saved. Around them, agents secured the warehouse, the storm outside muffling the chaos with the steady hush of snow. Crane and Dalton, once so certain of their power, now stood shackled under the harsh beam of justice. And for the first time in many nights, Willow Creek's darkness felt a little lighter. The storm had broken by morning, leaving Willow Creek blanketed in white silence, a town washed clean by snow and the sudden fall of two men who had ruled from the shadows. Within the shelter of the county station, Officer Ryan Hale sat on a cot, his uniform replaced by a simple wool blanket draped over his shoulders. His face was pale, lined with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with relief and gratitude. He turned toward Jack Carter, who stood quietly near the doorway, his broad shoulders silhouetted by the rising sun. Rex rested at his side, head raised, his amber eyes watchful. "I owe you both my life," Hale said, voice still hoarse but steady now. "They tried to bury me, but you pulled me back. And more than that, you've given this town proof of the rot that's been poisoning it." Jack only nodded, modest as ever, while Rex thumped his tail once against the floor, as if to accept the thanks in silence. Ryan's recovery came slowly but surely. Doctors confirmed he had suffered smoke inhalation and hypothermia, but with rest and care, he would return to strength. The charges against him, fabricated by Crane's men to ensure his silence, were dropped in full. Papers already carried headlines of corruption unveiled, with Crane and Dalton in custody awaiting trial. Hale stood one afternoon on the courthouse steps, his voice ringing clear to the crowd that gathered. Justice isn't served by men in power, but by those who dare to act when it's hardest. His gaze fell toward Jack and Rex at the edge of the assembly, and the applause that followed was not only for him, but for the quiet veteran and his loyal dog who refused to step into the spotlight. Emily Carter had waited through long hours of worry, her small figure pacing at the window of their modest home, her crutches tapping nervously against the wood. When she finally spotted her father striding down the path, Rex bounding beside him, she burst into tears of relief. With a cry of joy, she hurried outside, the uneven rhythm of her gait carrying her across the snow. The metal glint of her prosthetic leg caught the sunlight, but she paid it no mind, launching herself into her father's embrace as Rex pressed close, tail wagging furiously. Jack lifted her gently, kissing the crown of her head, his eyes damp though his voice remained steady. "We're safe," he murmured, though the weight in his chest told him safety was never simple. Emily clung to Rex next, wrapping her arms around his damp fur, whispering, "You're my hero," into his ear as the dog nuzzled her cheek. The town of Willow Creek, once quiet to the point of forgetting, could not ignore the story that had unfolded in its streets and rivers. A week later, the square was alive with banners strung across lampposts and garlands draped over the old bandstand. Families gathered in thick coats, children perched on shoulders, elders leaning on canes to witness what the mayor called a day to honor. Courage! The air buzzed with anticipation, the cold softened by the warmth of shared pride. Emily wore a pale blue dress sewn by neighbors, her hair brushed smooth and tied with a ribbon, her cheeks flushed with excitement. She stood proudly at her father's side, Rex positioned between them, every inch the guardian he had always been. The ceremony began with words of solemn weight. The mayor, a stout man with a white mustache, addressed the crowd from the bandstand, his voice echoing through the crisp air. He spoke of betrayal within the department, of a tycoon who thought himself untouchable, and of the night those lies unraveled. But most of all, he spoke of the people who stepped forward. "Not all heroes wear badges," he said firmly. "Not all stand in the light. Some come quietly, carrying scars, carrying burdens, but they rise when others fall." His words turned toward Jack, whose head lowered humbly, and toward Rex, who stood still, ears perked, as if understanding every syllable. A hush spread as the mayor held up a medal, gleaming against the winter sun. It was the honorary K-9 service medal, rarely awarded, its ribbon dyed in the town's colors of deep green and silver. The mayor bent and clipped it gently onto Rex's collar, and for a heartbeat the dog seemed puzzled by the weight. But then Emily threw her arms around him, laughing through tears, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Applause thundered, echoing off brick walls and frosted rooftops, a sound that made even Rex lift his head higher, his tail sweeping proudly through the snow. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for history. Jack's turn came next, though he had no desire for recognition. The mayor placed a medal of civic honor in his hand, but it was the crowd's gaze that felt heavier. Mothers held their children closer, old veterans straightened their spines, and teenagers clapped with sudden reverence. Jack's voice, when he finally spoke, was soft, carried not to boast but to remind. Heroes are rarely the ones who seek the name. Sometimes it's a man who's seen too much war, sometimes it's a dog who refuses to give up, and sometimes it's a child who has the courage to speak when others stay silent. His words struck the hearts of many, and the silence that followed was as respectful as the applause that soon rose to meet it. Emily stood between her father and Rex as the ceremony closed, her small hand gripping Jack's fingers, her other resting lightly on the dog's back. She smiled so brightly it seemed to chase away the memory of nights filled with fear. Neighbors who once pitied her now cheered her name, not as a fragile child, but as part of the trio that had defended their town. Her crutches stood against the stage, forgotten for the moment as she balanced on her prosthetic with determination. When the band struck a lively tune and families spilled into the square for celebration, Emily's laughter mingled with Rex's bark, and Jack allowed himself a rare smile. The evening light cast long shadows, but none were dark. Children darted through the snow with cups of cocoa, and elders clapped to the rhythm of fiddles played by local musicians. Jack lingered at the edge, content to watch rather than bask, his eyes soft as Emily twirled clumsily but joyfully in her new dress. Rex lay at his feet, head lifted, scanning the crowd with the vigilance of one who had carried burdens too heavy for his kind, yet still chosen loyalty. When Jack reached down to scratch behind his ear, the dog leaned into the touch, closing his eyes in trust. The night ended with lanterns strung high across the square, glowing golden against the winter sky. The people of Willow Creek would remember the fall of Silas Crane, the betrayal of Dalton, the bravery of Hale. But more than that, they would remember the quiet strength of a man who asked for nothing, a dog who risked everything, and a little girl who never let her voice be silenced. Heroes, the mayor had said, are not always loud. Sometimes they are found in the quiet gestures, in steadfast loyalty, in the courage of those who live simply but act greatly when the moment demands. And in that truth, Willow Creek discovered its future. In the end, this story reminds us that true heroism is not always loud or celebrated in grand ways. Sometimes it is found in the quiet sacrifices of a veteran who carries his scars without complaint, in the loyalty of a dog who risks everything for love, and in the courage of a small child who dares to speak up against injustice. Compassion and silent sacrifice can change lives, heal communities, and shine a light where darkness has lingered. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe so you never miss another tale of courage and faith. May God bless you and your family with strength and peace.